In-depth journalism in the Memphis community, the Daily Memphian is of Memphis, not just in Memphis, and seeks to tell the stories of this city. TheDailyMemphian.com. Truth in place.
Welcome back to another edition of the Daily Memphian's Memphis Grizzlies podcast. This is your host, Grizzlies beat writer Drew Hill, joined as always by columnist Chris Herrington. The season is over. The Grizzlies wrapped it up with a 2-point loss to the Oklahoma City Thunder on Saturday. Exit interviews were Sunday. There was a lot said, a lot of words from Zach Kleiman, a lot of words from Ja and from Jaron and from Dez. So we have a lot to get into. I think Chris and I are going to go back and forth here. We each picked 5 things that we found to be notable on exit interview day, and we will touch on those 5 topics. And that's how this will go. But before we get into that, Chris, just your thoughts on Game 4, the way that it ended, and the subsequent fallout here over 2 days.
It would have been nice for the Grizzlies to have a longer playoff run. I don't know if I personally was up for it. As I said when I walked in, I'm literally sick and tired. I think my body might have rejected a second round of the playoffs, even if the Grizzlies had acquired one. I thought the games in Memphis, to qualify this, unusually good in some ways. Obviously, you blow a 29-point lead or whatever in game 3. But coming out of the first 2 games, I think games 3 and 4 were more competitive than most people expected them to be. I think, Scottie Pippen having huge games in both was really positive for like his trajectory and where his standing on the team going into the summer. I think Vincent Williams reappearing for one great play in game 3 and a good game in game 4 was good for him to serve a reminder that, hey, I can help this team too. And I thought it was interesting. The first half of game 3 was super interesting for them to build that lead and sort of show, that maybe they'd figured out some stuff about playing that team, and then it went the way it went. But, I think people got, even though the quote unquote collapse or the loss in game 3 was disappointing, people got good games out of those games, more competitive games than I think anyone would have expected after a 51-point game 1 loss.
Yeah, I thought it was notable that those 2 games at least did provide some entertainment value, right? Because the first 2 games certainly did not, right, of the series. It's a whole nother thing to talk about, but it was notable that the crowds were not very good, I think, at both of those games.
Right.
And it's hard to pass blame on like the fans, in my opinion, because it ended with such a thud, the season just in general ended with such a thud, and you'd just gotten crushed in 2 straight games in OKC, and you were coming home, and the belief level was about as low as it could possibly get. But it was notable.
And I don't want to totally derail the pod into this could be an enormous tangent, and we can circle back quickly, but it's not just a Grizzlies issue. I mean, partly it's a Grizzlies issue, but this is in the context of, I think, a city that's gotten out of the habit of going to things post-COVID and post the crime spike that happened in Memphis with COVID. Like, it's not just Grizzlies games. Like, the Zoo was in the news recently about their attendance being down. Redbirds. You can look at other stuff. And it's sort of and again, I've never been in the business of telling people how to spend their money, because one thing that gets left out of this discussion is that it's not cheap to go to games. And I speak from experience here, because I did not cover the Grizzlies when they first came to Memphis. I was a fan. I may have been one of the top 10 NBA fans in the city of Memphis. I went to like 5 games that season. You know why? Because we didn't have any money. And so that's part of it too. But I do think there's the issue of sort of a city that's gotten out of the habit of going to stuff that would probably be healthy for the city to generally get back into that habit. Not just with the Grizzlies, but with other stuff too.
Yeah, no, I think that'd be great for everything, right?
Yeah.
It'd be a real boost to the city if everybody just decided to go back to life before COVID and the way that we all sort of got out and about a little bit more often. But it was the perfect storm of crappiness to hurt the crowd. Like, no Ja on Saturday, excuse me. I mean, that obviously hurts the crowd. Just the fact that the series was already 3-0.
Right.
The fact that it felt hopeless at that point, and the tickets weren't getting any cheaper. That it adds up. It makes sense,
Well, it's a different thing to be the 8th seed in a playoff series when you're making the playoffs for the first time in an era, like a few years ago when they played Utah.
Yep. And
then to be the 8th seed 4 or 5 years after that, when you're at a point where you expect to be better, right? So that feeds into it.
Yeah, and even go back to that Utah series, that was during COVID, right? So the crowds were limited, but it was as full as it could be at those games with Grizzlies fans. And then the next time that the team made the playoffs, that Minnesota series, those crowds were big and lively,
right,
and fun. But the team is in a different place than it was back then. And Memphis is in a different place than it was back then. And both of those elements sort of, I think, have an impact on the result on Sunday and on Thursday for that matter, Saturday. I keep saying the game's Sunday. Game was Saturday. Saturday and Thursday. I think both have an impact, right? The Memphis, as you point out, isn't quite the same as it was prior to COVID. This team also, I don't think, necessarily struck a chord with the fan base the same way that teams of the past have. And I think that's also fair to say. For as wildly popular as Ja is, he's not beloved by every fan in the fan base.
Well, there's also the inconsistency to his availability all season long, I think. Hurt the rhythm of the team on the floor and probably hurt the rhythm of the team at the box office.
There were a lot of fans that questioned the toughness of this team. And that seemed to be something that struck a chord with Zach Kleiman as he talked. Again, we could talk about this for an entire podcast, but I do think that, it was disappointing the way that the season came to a close, but it wasn't necessarily surprising, I think, to see what it looked like in those final 2 games at FedEx Forum. Anything more to add before we move on here?
No, I think as we get into our gimmick here, that's going to bring us into the topics anyway.
Okay. All right. Well, then I'll pass it to you to go first here. Where we said we were going to come up with 5 things that were said at exit interviews that we wanted to either discuss or we wanted to know more about. So why don't you get us started, Chris?
So this relates to something you alluded to a second ago about the team sort of in Kleiman and Isolo both did this, and at least one other player did, sort of alluding to the need for grittiness or need for whatever. And in the context of that whole answer, Kleiman said, I pulled out this one sentence. I've got a lot of guys who I believe in that fit the identity of this group and we're pushing forward together. And in the context of that, he explicitly mentioned Zach Edey, Jalen Wells, Cam Spencer, the 3 rookies. Cam Spencer not on the main roster at this point. And then Scottie Pippen, who had been a two-way, and this was technically his 3rd NBA season, but it was his first NBA season on a main roster for a team. So he was kind of a quasi-rookie himself. I thought it was interesting that when Kleiman went on a couple of tangents where he went on 5 or 6 minute answers that sort of got off of the question itself. But that's kind of useful too, because you get a peek into where he's really thinking.
Yes.
And if you think about the Grizzlies roster, you can almost divide it into 3 groups. There's the obvious big 3 of Desmond Bane, John Morant, Jaren Jackson, who he was complimentary of individually and as a group, but I thought notably stopped short of insisting we're bringing all 3 back. He left the door open there.
Yep.
And then there are these 4 players I mentioned who he made a point of singling out and saying, I know they're young. I'm paraphrasing. I know they're young, but these guys have the grittiness and the kind of demeanor we want. And basically guaranteeing we're moving forward with those guys. Then there's sort of everyone else who's by omission, right? He didn't mention Santi Aldama. He didn't mention Luke Kennard. He mentioned Gigi Jackson and Vince Williams, but in a different context, not in this context. I thought that was notable. And to me, it was maybe a little bit of peek into how he's conceiving the roster. But it says something about those 4 guys he made a point of singling out, that Edey, Spencer, Wells, Pippen. And so in some ways, if you want to handicap who's on the roster next season, those guys may be safer than anybody.
No, seriously. It does give a peek behind the curtain at what he's attentive.
Yeah.
Clearly he's attentive to certain things, and one of those things is the conversation that the team is not tough enough.
Right. Yes.
And he singled those players out and saying these
They
are
embody that.
tough. These are the players that are tough.
They're young, but they're tough.
But yes. I want to bring up something you brought up on Jeff's show, which I thought about as well, and I thought you made a really good point, that you listen for things that are repetitive
100%.
in these answers. That's a wonderful point that you made.
The players may not do this,
too.
but for the Memphis Grizzlies, the coaches and the front office people, they prepare a message before they get in front of a microphone.
Yes. And we can tie all of this in, but one of the things that I wanted to point out from Kleiman, which is, I guess we'll count it as my first thing,
Okay.
is the fact that he brought up multiple times that the team was made unintentionally young.
Right.
And this applies to what you're talking about too. He said he wasn't anticipating that Jalen Wells was going to be in the starting lineup and such a big part of this team, but he believes in competition and he believes in merit.
Yeah.
And he believes that, Jalen Wells just played better than the vet.
Marcus Smart.
Pick your vet.
Right.
It could have been Jake LaRavia, whatever.
Right.
But you would assume it'd be Marcus Smart, right? So, I found that to be very notable. Although I don't know how well that's received, because in the end it may have been unintentional, but it still happened.
Right.
And in the end, it does fall on the shoulders of Zach Kleiman. And there were moves that moved veteran players out over the course of the season.
And did not bring veteran players in, right?
Right.
The way a Dorian Finney-Smith deal could have been, the way other Marcus Smart trades could have. Yeah.
But it doesn't. But no matter if it was no matter how it's received, I believe him when he says it was unintentional, right? Maybe it wasn't unintentional. They didn't expect that this was going to happen, But in the end, it is what happened. And so when you talk about repeat messages and you talk about him bringing up the young players, when you combine those two things together, like him calling the team unintentionally young was like the first thing that came to mind when we started, this back and forth here.
Well, when he makes a point of talking about gritty players, and he makes a point of highlighting those four guys I mentioned, and he should have been asked about this, and it was on my list of questions, and we just ran out of time, right? They only gave us so much time, and he gave long answers, and there were questions left on the cutting room floor for me, and this is one of them. So this is not one of my full five because it's something that was never said, but it relates to this first thing. What do you make? Do you think it's just oversight, or do you think it's meaningful that he did not mention Santi Aldama?
I think it's probably oversight, but I'm not sold on the idea that they're 100% committed to making sure he comes back and is a Grizzly.
Right.
I think if that were the case, that is not something he would have had. He would have let go by without saying something about it. And I just wonder what Santi thinks he's going to get. Like, does Santi think he's going to get $20 million? Like, the Grizzlies don't have space for something like that.
Santi put up a big stat line in Game 4, but his defense and physicality down the stretch of the season and into the playoffs was notably lacking. And with the team really emphasizing, by team I mean Kleiman and Isolo, emphasizing this idea of grittiness and toughness, it makes me wonder about that. But you said unintentionally young was one of yours, right? So is it back to me for another one? Or do you want to go ahead?
I'll go ahead.
All right.
I thought it was notable. I mean, it was the first time really that we heard a player talk about the true disconnect that was happening with the team when Jenkins was fired. It was when Desmond Bane was asked about it. And he said there was definitely a point in the season where we just weren't competing with the urgency that we needed to. But I don't think that all of that falls on Taylor. There's so much stuff going on within team dynamics and stuff like that. And they start to rear their head. Like, to me, that...
So let me, because we can do this in one thing, because I have a different quote on basically the same topic. And mine came from Isolo, where he said, I came into a very different job. As an assistant coach, your job is solely to help bring somebody else's vision to life. And I tried to do that to the best of my ability and offer ideas. But ultimately, it has to all be connected. I think both these quotes are a window into. Everyone was surprised when the coaching, nationally surprised when the coaching change happened. But there's a little bit of windows here into like how awkward and strained it maybe always was process-wise during the season.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. But for Bane to bring up team dynamic, that suggests that it had become more than just the message on the court wasn't reaching the players, that there was actual turmoil and hard feelings potentially between players and coach. Like that was the first time it had become anything other than, the defense slipped up. You know, it was like, no, there's team dynamics in play here, and it had gotten messy. And that's paraphrasing, but that's essentially what he was saying. And that's a lot of what you heard from the outside, right? In the moment that happened. But when Zach Kleiman got up there post, Taylor Jenkins firing and talked for 2 minutes, there's not enough time there, for him to offer any sort of real insight into what happened. But to me, I thought that was notable. Now, what's in the past is in the past at this point, right. But, it gives a glimpse at why that firing happened when it did, and that it was more than just what was happening on the court. It had become, there was some level of uncomfortability that had been created in that locker room. It's
interesting because we're talking about the same issue, maybe at different times and different perspectives. You're talking about it in terms of the players in the moment at that point in the season. To me, the Cicelo quote sort of points to, it was a problem from the very beginning in that, like, you hire this guy who had been the head coach in Europe, award-winning coach of the year head coach, known for his offense. You hire him to be the lead assistant. Then he shows up to training camp and all the focus is on installing an offensive philosophy that is from a different assistant coach, right? And I'm sort of reading into what he says because he certainly doesn't explicitly say this, but it comes across as, you're trying to help do your job as the assistant with someone else's vision. It's not totally yours, but ultimately it has to be connected, in this idea that things were just not connected from the jump. Now, it's easy to blame that on Taylor Jenkins. Maybe that's where the blame primarily lies. It could be elsewhere too. Like maybe there was organizational communication more broadly that should have been better on some of this stuff. But to me, Isolo does sort of point to that, like, this was sort of an odd fit from the jump,
Yeah. So I think that takes me into the other. I bunched two together here, and that was just the endorsement, right? The quasi endorsement. The quasi endorsement.
You going with Ja there? I thought not just Ja. There's another.
Bane had a good one, I thought, as well.
I thought Pippen had a strong one.
I did not include Pippin's on the list, but Bane said, I really like Tomas and what he brings to the table. He's very direct and honest. He holds the guys accountable. I think he's a bright mind, too. I think he has a bright future as a head coach. Morant said, I feel like Isolo is a good coach. For me, going into my film sessions or just talking about the game, I see and hear that he sees the same things that I see on the floor. I wouldn't say it's been surprising, but it's exciting. We continue to just pick each other's brain and try to find the best solutions for us offensively so we can be good at what we want to do. He's a big-time competitor. Right. How I take on my matchups, he does the same thing with the opposing head coach. I feel like that is all good signs in a coach. He's somebody that wants to go to war with you and holds everybody accountable, but he also instills all the confidence in you. Like two pretty ringing endorsements of the guy.
So let me add a third. This is not one of my five for the pod, but I had already pulled it out for a separate thing I'm writing. Here's what Scottie Pippen said. And on the Morant quote, to me, the word exciting leaped out when he said it.
Yes.
That's like above and beyond, right? Here's the Pippen quote. I feel like Thomas is a coach that instills confidence in me, trust in me. I feel like once he got the job, I kind of took off. He allowed me to go out there and play free, go out there, be myself. I wasn't really worried about the minutes, wasn't really worried about if I'm doing this right or this wrong. And I feel like he got the best out of me. Now, Pippen is someone who really turned the corner after the coaching change. He also fits what Isolo seems to prefer as a base, philosophy. And so, but I think the Ja thing of all of that is the one that's most important because some players are more influential than other players.
Yes.
And to me, that really we already thought Isolo was going to keep the job, but to me, that hints very strongly that if Ja remains, which I think he will, I think the very strong chance Isolo remains. And maybe Isolo regardless, but I think in particular, I have a hard time seeing, Ja Morant on the team and Isolo not being the coach.
No, I agree. I think if I were to tell you who you take in Isolo or the field, you would take Isolo.
Yes.
Is that correct? Yes. Like I just think that this is not the first time that the players have had good things to say about him, very clearly. And so I think that this does a nice job of putting a bow on it. But the players, several of them, Zach Edey being one of them as well, have felt empowered by him becoming the coach and the situations that they've been put in. And I think he does have a little bit more of a direct, no-nonsense approach. I think the question that I have is they talk about the accountability, but are we going to see
and
it?
Making people uncomfortable is something that Zach Kleiman said.
Yes. Are we going to see that? Or is this a hire that's actually making them more comfortable and it's evident because they're already comfortable?
It felt like a little bit of a shot at Taylor Jenkins, the implication that he was not willing enough to be the bad guy and to push players, to hold them accountable, blah, 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 which may have been some truth to that, but I don't know if that's not true of the whole organization, not just Taylor Jenkins. And I don't know that I'm convinced that this coaching hire radically changes that. And so I think that's a real question.
Yeah. I think we're trending towards all indications. I mean, Zach Kleiman, I should say, was not willing to say he's going to be the next coach, but right. A non-answer was almost an answer there in terms of, I haven't had time to even think about it. He could have said, well, we're going to weigh our options, but that's not what he said. He said, I haven't even had time to think about it. Right. I thought that all of the answers on Isolo were definitely notable. All right, Chris, I'll pass it back to you, but first let's take a break for a message from our sponsor.
Want to make a big impact without getting lost in a big system? Join Youth Villages to be a force for families while becoming part of one. Help make positive changes on a national scale, one community at a time. It takes a family to transform lives. Start with yours. Apply now at youthvillages.org/careers.
So, like you, I've got one where I paired two quotes, and this will bring us back to Thomas Isolo, and also from a player we have not heard from yet in this exercise. These two quotes, I feel like we're in a kind of sneaky conversation with each other, kind of a potentially provocative conversation with each other. Here's the Isolo quote, and it relates a little bit to some of the Morant Pippen stuff we were just talking about. I think this is when I asked him about, what his philosophy of the team with this talent would look like, if he got to start scratch for next season. He said, and he's going back to when he took over as interim. He said, we opted for smaller variations, which I think were somewhat successful, especially in the half court. I think it's more in terms of those for a potential future, where we were able to highlight the strengths of our primary ball handlers and also Zach Edey, right? That's him expressing a fundamental sort of core strategy for maximizing this talent, right? My other quote is from Jaren Jackson Jr. I can't be one-dimensional. I have to be able to adapt to any situation. I think notably absent when Isolo just gets to go turn loose and start talking about the team is he didn't bring up Jaren Jackson Jr. He brings up the ball handlers and Zach Edey, right? He talks about Zach Edey constantly. Jaren's the one guy.
That's been the case. That's been the case.
Jaren's the all-star on the team this season. Jaren's a guy who might make it all-NBA. He's going to get all-NBA votes. Nobody else will, whether he makes the team or not. He's the guy who is eligible for some kind of contract extension, and if doesn't get that, he'll be a free agent next year. To me, it's a real question about, and I think Isolo, by the way, did a pretty good job with Jackson in the series. I think Jackson's usage in the series was complicated and subject to adjustments and counter adjustments and all of that. And he talked about Jaren as a mismatch during the series. So maybe this is just an oversight. But I think when he thinks at his core about his basketball team, he thinks about the ball handlers and the big, right? He's not thinking about this guy. Jaren, I think Jaren was very self-reflective when he started talking about basketball yesterday in all kinds of ways. And it wasn't like, I'm a star, I need the ball. He was out basically saying, like, I play both ends. I play all kinds of ways. I need to adapt to whatever the situation is. And so to me, that expresses a willingness to adapt to a situation that doesn't foreground him. But the question of, are you going to invest this much money in this kind of player if he's not core to the philosophy of this coach and this other player that you're dedicated to me, there's a real interesting tension there, potentially.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. One thing I would note, don't have the quote in front of me, but at one point, Zach Kleiman brought up going more towards pick and roll and even said, and I'd be happy to talk about how this optimizes Jaren Jackson Jr. too. Never got to that point.
Right.
But included that, I mean, because
you could definitely add that to the list of things that it'd be interesting to hear more about, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
But he never got to that because there were too many other questions to answer and he went long on so many. But I did find that notable.
Well, to me, there's two sides of a coin here. To me, this speaks to Jaren Jackson Jr.'s both ability and willingness to impact the team in all kinds of different roles and all kinds of different places.
That willingness was explained by Zach Kleiman as well. That willingness was noted by Zach as he talked about Jaren. Yes.
So there's that. There's opportunity there. Like no matter what you want to do with your team, Jaren can help you and he's willing to help you. He doesn't say, I have to have 25 shots in this place to right? But you turn that around to the level of money it will probably take to keep him, and you want to spend that level of money on a player depending on what role you want that player to play. So I just think there's a lot of stuff there.
I made note of, now this isn't on the list, but I did make note of the fact that Jaren, when he was asked about how close the Grizzlies are to being able to play at a championship level, put it on himself.
Right.
Said he's got to be better if this team is going to be better. And there was a level of accountability there that he took that others didn't take. And I thought that all of that was certainly notable. Two other things we got to bring up, like the last two things on my list here. And
I have two as well. We have four other things we got to bring up.
I might be switching,
unless we overlap.
but I'm just switching.
It's interesting we haven't exactly overlapped on any of these.
I know. I'm switching my list to be honest because I feel like there's two things we absolutely have to talk about.
Of course, we did have 4 hours worth of transcribed conversation to pull from.
I know. It was a long day. One of them, easily the most inflammatory thing of the day. The thing that what I knew was going to go viral the minute he said it to me. You know where I'm going with this?
I think so.
Josh said he had the Thunder figured out.
This is one of my 5. We did overlap. Let's do it.
Look, I was going to ask you, because I'm having a hard time figuring out what to make of this. Does it come across as confident or does it come across as...
It comes across as honest. And honesty can get punished, which it is in this case to some degree. I can't get mad at this because I literally wrote, my name is on it. Before Josh said this, I wrote during the series, and I didn't write John Morant has figured out how to beat the Thunder. What I did write was Thomas Isolo has figured out how to compete with the Thunder. And I think that's what I watched every second of that series with my own eyeballs, and I saw this happen. And what they figured out was we have to take the first good shot we can find decisively. And the more we dribble and the more we pass, the more they're going to turn it over. They're going to get turnovers and they're just going to score immediately. And the only way we can limit the turnovers is to play really fast, take the first good shot we can find. They started doing that in the second half of game 2. They lost that half by 1 point. Their turnovers were way down. They came into game 3 doing that. They were up by 27. Their turnovers were way down. Morant gets hurt. The whole building just dies. Everything stops instantly. They should have held on and won that game anyway, but they didn't. They started turning it over again. The Thunder could handle the defensive pressure. The Thunder come back and win. You go into game 4 without Morant. You're deploying the same strategy. It's working great for about 9 minutes. They turn the ball over twice in the first 9 minutes. They have a lead, and then without Morant, they just couldn't handle the pressure. They started turning the ball over, and then they lost. So Morant says 2 things here. He says, if I don't get hurt, it's 2-2 going back to Oklahoma City. I think that's very easy to say. I think that's probably true. That doesn't mean you're going to win the series. I think it's probably true. Now, when he says, I figured them out, that's a kind of quote people are going to throw back at you. But I don't mind this. Because I think he's saying what he believes. And I think he's a reason to believe it.
I don't mind it either. But I'll speak, and I think he's probably right. Like, the Grizzlies did lose that second game by 2 points. They got the worst shooting performance from OKC that they were going to get in the
took
series. Like, that was the game that they could have won with Ja. And clearly game 3 was when they could have won with Ja, because the minute they didn't have a true ball handler in the game, like, they were just a disaster.
They were also just shell shocked. They should have won that game anyway.
But I'll speak up for the people that there are certainly there's someone out there that heard that and said, "Come on, Ja." Like,
most people heard it that way.
You know, like, you didn't win a game, and
Right.
on all you're doing by saying that is being defensive,
Right.
when it's not even necessary. Just take your lumps here. Yeah. So I don't know what to make of it. I certainly can't blame the people that think that way or will
Right.
see that and think that way, because the Thunder crushed them in the first 2 games of the series. Like, what suggests that that this would have been a more competitive series overall? You know, even if it goes back 2-2, I don't feel great about the Grizzlies' chances of winning the series still at that point. But I do think
I'm just so weary of Ja as like a ball to bat around within social media and TV that I'm just sort of willing to bend over backwards and treat him as a person in a room I was in looking at while he was talking to me.
100%.
You know?
100%. Because it's I didn't tweet that out.
I didn't either.
Intentionally. Because I knew that was going to go
Right.
off. And I don't even like attaching myself to that stuff as much, unless it's in a different context. But like the what if, that sort of thing, like the stuff about the celebrations, like I didn't even want to be attached to it, because you just know it's going to take off no matter what, because it's Ja. He was right about that. That was the part he was right about. He knew it was going to go viral before he even said it. And he was like careful about the way he said it. And then he said it, and no one included the part about him saying, you know, I really want to be careful with this because I'm not trying to. Right. No, that part of it gets left out every single time. So you're right about that. Still think he could have.
So we overlap. We each got one more.
Yeah. You want to go?
No, you go ahead.
It's the Jaren contract stuff. I mean, we're going to have a whole summer to talk about this. He didn't give
basically
much of
Kleiman
an
and
answer.
Jaren both deflecting the question.
They both
Right.
deflected, but then it took three and 4 tries before we finally got an answer. You know, first you asked him, and he said something of the effect of,
I'll leave it to my agents.
I'm not going to say that to the world.
Right.
I'll talk about that with my agent. Then to Michael, asked him about the Supermax. And
He said next question.
He said next question. He said, I never hit you guys with the next question, but next question.
No, he did next question very, very, very self-consciously.
Yes.
Very performative.
And then I came back.
He didn't say I plead the fifth. He could have done that.
I came back because I was trying to get something out of him about what he thinks about the franchise. So what does playing for this franchise mean to you? He essentially said, I haven't had longevity in one place my whole life until I got to Memphis. And that's true. If you read the series last year on Jaren, and even the one that I did this year on Jaren, then you know that he's bounced all over the place for like most of his life. And so Memphis has been a real consistency there. He talked about how much that matters to him. And then finally, we were playing tag team. Michael came back and asked him about if signing with Memphis is a priority, in which he said, of course. And so that was notable. Because we don't know. I mean, it doesn't mean he's going to sign an extension this summer. Like that, right. That's not what that means. But it does suggest that this is where he wants to play.
That his eye is not on
Los
getting
Angeles
somewhere else
New
one way
York
or another. Right.
Yeah. I mean, maybe that happens anyway, but it does seem like with those last 2 answers, he at least suggested that he has enjoyed playing here, and it doesn't feel like that it's completely run out.
He had a quote that really spoke to my heart and all of that. I don't have the exact word in front of me, where he said something like, I love it here. This is where I live. I'm about to go home right now. That sounds like the best. It's like, I agree, Jared. That does sound like the best. I want to go home too.
Here, I've got it. Where is it? Right here. Of course, I love this place. This is where I live. This is my home. I'm totally about to go back to my home, like in a couple minutes. Yeah, bro. I feel like that sounds the best.
I agree. It does sound good. It sounds good. All right, so my last one. This will wrap us up.
We're going to have a whole summer, by the way, of talking about Jaren extensions, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
So let's leave some of that.
So this I thought was an interesting quote from Zach Kleiman. And I sort of felt personally targeted by it, but then I stopped to think, and I was like, have I expressed this opinion publicly in written or spoken form? Sometimes I can't remember like what I've said to you or other people in conversation and what I've said in public, which is dangerous. But it is sort of my belief. And he was like shooting down my belief. This is that Kleiman quote. He said, "I wish we could snap our fingers and have some gritty veteran wing. We're not one gritty veteran wing away from winning the championship." Well, it hasn't been my assertion publicly or privately that they're one gritty veteran wing away from winning the championship. I do think it's quite possible they're one gritty veteran wing away from winning 54 games in a playoff series. Like, I think that's very possible. And in fact, I believe that's probably the best path for them to try to pursue this summer. The fact that he raised that in the air only to bat it away made me really think hard that some big changes might be coming. Because he's already said, we love all these young guys, we're keeping them together. And so if you're keeping your core together and you're keeping those young guys, the only thing left for you to try to do is to go at a gritty veteran wing to complete the picture and then roll forward with this coach and try to be good, which is frankly what I think they should do. The fact that he raised that up only to bat it away makes me, maybe this said more than he intended to say, and maybe I'm reading too much into it. That on top of him not pounding the table and saying, we still believe in these three guys, we're going to braid down Bill Street with these guys. That is not what happened. I really makes me wonder more than I did walking into the room that morning whether this might get broken up one way or another.
Yeah, you make a good point. And I could argue that it's not even just adding a gritty wing. If you just played the gritty players that you have now for more minutes, maybe you win 50-plus games.
Oh, here's an unpopular opinion that'll make people think I'm just pie in the sky. They could take this entire roster 1 through 18, bring it back next season with East Los the coach. And if things break right, they can win 53 games in a playoff series with the team they have.
Yes.
Like this idea that we're so far away, you're like 3 games out of the 2 seed. And I actually don't think they're as far away. Again, I'm not talking about winning a title. I just think that's just talk. I think they're not as far away from being a competitive playoff team as they proclaim to be, as Zach Kleiman proclaimed to be, or fans think they are.
That assumes internal
No, it does. It assumes guys are healthy and guys are committed and guys take steps forward. It assumes all that. That's why I'm saying I would try to go out and add the gritty veteran wing. That's what I would be trying to do. Yeah,
there's really 2 different ways that you can look at this franchise. And if you are of the thought that if you don't win the championship, it means nothing, then you're right. Then Zach Kleiman is right. This team is so far away. If you are of the thought that it's good enough to have a tremendous basketball season in Memphis where the team wins anywhere between 50 and 55 games, they make it out of the first round of the playoffs, and they lose some competitive series to the best player in the world, they're not that far from that.
This is my point.
That is not where they're far from.
And I think when you blow that up in pursuit of the other, you may end up in the wilderness for 10 years. And this is not the way a lot of people like to think about this, but it's been from day one the way I do think about it.
Yeah. There is value to the regular season.
People buy tickets and go to games, and you want more people to buy tickets and go to games.
We just talked about that's a problem.
That's right. It drives me crazy sometimes when I listen to national NBA podcast stuff and they start bemoaning the regular season. And I agree that it's too long, by the way. I think it should be shorter. But it's almost like people act like these games happen as fodder for podcasts and TV segments. These games are actual activities that take place in actual places in front of actual people. And the value of those experiences being good, not just in April and May, but in November, December, January, February, I just think is super important.
All right, well, that is going to do it for us this week. Thanks, as always, by the way, for listening all season long. The podcast will probably be a little bit more infrequent now that the season is over, but we'll be back. We've got some more things to talk about this month.
There'll be a lot to talk about. It'll be a little bit more subject to the whims of when they choose to make news, because there are no games scheduled. But there'll be plenty to talk about.
But until next time, for Drew and for Chris, we're out of here.